I think in many cases it comes down to how aligned you are with your values and what's meaningful to you. I don't think we can completely eradicate all pain and all suffering or all kind of bad moods, but I think we can minimize it by, acknowledging, yeah, maybe I don't feel great this morning, but what am I going to go and do this morning that's going to, have value to me and to others as well. I think it's really important as well. So is the work that I'm going to do have value to me and or to others or both?
Hi, I'm the self-development coach, Johnny Lawrence, and welcome to the Self-Development Podcast. In this episode, I'll be chatting with Paul Weeden. Paul is a counsellor, cognitive behavioural therapist and coach, and believes in integrating a variety of theoretical frameworks and theories to provide clients with a more comprehensive understanding of what good mental health and well-being looks like with a variety of perspectives. His work includes helping people change physical behaviours or psychological behaviours, I'm not sure which, probably be both,
Yeah.
addictions and habits. He specialises in treating anxiety, depression and low self-esteem. He offers a psychological and emotional framework and tools adapted and inspired by exploring ancient teachings like Buddhism and Stoicism. I love this. Yeah, I'm going to ask a few questions about that thing. Paul is a strong advocate for improving the awareness and knowledge of mental health and self-development, and has termed a framework he calls the 8 pillars, which are acceptance, surrender, commitment, responsibility, trust, forgiveness, respect, and giving. Love all of that. I am really excited about talking to you today. How are you today, Paul?
Thanks, Johnny. Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be here. I'm really looking forward to our talk today and seeing you again. Yeah. Thank you.
One of the things that I find really fascinating about like your approach is that your approach is about education.
Yeah.
And I think I know that sounds like an odd thing to say because you would think that would be obvious, but I think a lot of the time people go to people and they work through their problems, whether it be a counselor, a psychotherapist, a coach or whatever, but they don't come away with the knowledge to be able to look after themselves moving forward. Not always anyway. It happens a lot. I see it a lot in things like personal training. When I was a personal trainer, people would train with some trainers and they would be in the gym for 3 years. And then when that relationship ended, they didn't know any more about how to behave in the gym without that trainer. And
Wow.
I thought, interesting. Like the way I look at it, it's like probably the worst business model in the world. But the way I look at it is that the day that the client doesn't need me is a good day.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
How about you?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. It is strange. I think when you help people, in a way, you're working towards putting yourself out of business with that person, or at least around that issue, and then hopefully getting a new referral via them or someone else. And hopefully, if it went well, they might come back and work with you again on something different or something deeper. So yeah, but it is an interesting thing, and you're right. I mean, when I've had counselling, I've had obviously quite a bit for my training. Yeah, you do get a lot of counsellors who just sit and listen and nod a lot and say, "Oh, okay, I hear you," and like and they're working on a psychoanalytic framework, it's sort of stemming from, which was really like, back in I think the 19th century, if you went to see Freud or Jung or someone like that, they would literally just sit and listen to you nearly every day, sometimes for years, before they would offer you much back, and just notice your frustrations, notice your reactions, notice your impulses, or whether you show up or not. They charged you when they went on holiday, sorry. So even if they couldn't treat you, they charged you anyway because you were still in their care. I'm not sure exactly what the justification was, but there was all these strange things, and at the end you would just get like a summary of, yeah, it appears that you struggle with accepting others as they are, or something like that. It was probably a bit longer than that, but the kind of things that you might sort of think, well, I kind of know that, and so I think when CBT became popular, maybe 10, 15 years ago, that sort of offered an alternative around looking at the beliefs and the evidence to support, how we feel and how we interact with others and ourselves, and then sort of working on challenging it cognitively, which helps to shift the emotions. You see,
yeah, because it's a far more prescriptive sort of way of working, which I think that is I mean, this is totally off topic, but that is the big thing, isn't it? In sort of in psychology, in being a psychotherapist, being a counselor, whatever. It's a lot of the complaints are usually they just sit there and they don't do anything. And there is a point where you got to get to know the client. And I am a strong believer. I do sort of lean more towards sort of like your Cole Rogers sort of way of
same, yeah.
But I believe the client has always got the answer. I'm never got the answer. All I do is reflect what I see and hear. But I think there is room for education. People do need to know things sometimes. I believe not all the time, but every now and again. And if I was to give information, and I'm sure you're the same, I offer it. I say, would you like to have it? I wouldn't just shove it down the throat.
Exactly. Or it's a suggestion. It's like, I've got an idea. Don't know if it will, work for you, but have you thought about, it's a soft way of bringing it in. But I also love Carl Rogers, and I remember reading all those books, client-centered therapy, and listening to the sort of encounter groups, and loved it. The idea of just there being no structure and everyone taking their turn, and allowing the client in a non-judgmental way to come up with their own solutions. It's great in an ideal world, but the reality is when we're triggered and under stress and under-resourced, it's in a short term, and most people are coming for short-term work these days because of time and money. So you're unlikely to see them for more than 6 months or a year at the most. And even in that time frame, they're going to need, a little nudge here and there, and a little sort of suggestion. And if you just kind of keep kind of doing as Rogers did, which is like, I can hear that you haven't got the answers yet, and I really hope you find them. I want to help you find them, but I'm not going to tell you what they are. I'm not even going to give you any hints. It's going to take a really long time for some people to, and some analysts would argue that you're over supporting them, and then you're just becoming like an advisor. But it's not an ideal world, is it? So sometimes clients don't come for the reasons for therapy, for the reasons that the people that create the models decide that it's about. Is that they are coming for advice and guidance and support, not just to be listened to. However, I think there are times when we've been through something, and we do just need to be listened to and heard and feel understood in a non-judgmental way. And I've really valued that when I've been going through something, a crisis, or I need to talk about something that happened a long time ago, and I just want someone to just really pay attention, and then at the end summarize. So you've told me what happened with mum or whatever, really upset you, and I'm really feeling that, and it's really come up today, and wow, like that's really important at times. But if it's current and like, look, I don't know what I'm doing right now, I need to get out of this loop in this relationship or this work pattern or whatever it is. It's like somebody actually saying, well, shall we explore what your strengths are and where your sort of maybe where your weaknesses are even, and how does that align with what you're actually doing in your life, and what actually really makes you happy and what doesn't make you happy, and kind of just being a bit more proactive and coachy, I think is the underlying phrase for this. It's really important, I think.
I think it's trying to move the client away from the problem and towards the solution, isn't it?
Solution focused,
and I think there's times where the approach we're discussing here, where you just sit and listen, it can almost add to the frustration. It can almost be antagonistic in a sense. When the client is desperate to find answers.
Exactly.
And we aren't robots, we aren't cyborgs. We do have intuitions and inclinations about things, and if it is helpful or we feel it might be helpful, we can offer those to the clients.
Absolutely. And if the pain is or the frustration, it's not physical pain, I mean, but like the emotional pain is so uncomfortable that the person is just driven to distraction or despair, then they're not going to thank you for encouraging them to sort of stay with that pain. If they can't do anything beyond it at the moment, that's why they're going to turn to other things to kind of cope with the pain, like painkillers or alcohol, drugs, or unhealthy relationship patterns.
Absolutely. And that's a really important point, a good point to bring up, because that is how a lot of addictions start. They start right there in the way I look at it. I explained it to a friend the other day. It was a very, very sort of crude example, but I said, when you're boiling water in a saucepan, I said, and if you leave it on the high thing for too long, it starts to overspill. But as soon as you put the lid on, it stops. And I said, an addiction is a bit like the lid.
Yes.
Yeah, it stops it from
Yeah.
spilling. It kind of stops it, but it
It's
does,
a coping strategy,
it
isn't it?
is, yeah, it doesn't solve the problem, but it
Yeah.
stops it from overspilling a little
It
bit.
can do initially, or it
Yeah.
seems to, like, because, sometimes people struggle to relax at the end of the week, and a drink or two takes the edge off it.
Mm.
They let go of the work problems, they forget themselves a bit, they engage in joyful conversations. They
Mm.
might, even though they might not feel confident as a dancer, if somebody says should we dance, they might get up and have a dance. So it works to a point, but then if they haven't got an off switch to say, or if they don't notice when it starts to feel bad or not feel good, and they just keep drinking, then that's not good. But
No.
so it's, how do we get the balance right and use it, in a healthy way, or find something else that's perhaps better
Yeah,
for us.
and that's one of the reasons why I use that as an example, because once you put the lid on, the answer isn't keep the lid on, the answer is turn it down.
Yes. Yeah.
But you
Yeah.
can't
Yeah.
put anything else in it when the lid's on.
No.
Like, it's
No.
that you're shut down, you're completely
Mm.
sealed. So to me,
And it's
it's
a bit
always,
like, yeah, and that made me think of slow boiling frog analogy, which is, if you put, apparently, I don't know this is true, but it's not very nice, but if you put a frog in a pan of cold water, it will sit there, and you turn it on, it will sit there until it's too late, even though it can hop out. It won't, apparently they won't realize that they can hop out until it's too late.
when you
And
keep turning
people,
it up.
yeah, if you
Yeah,
just like
yeah.
let it get hotter and hotter, it
Wow.
won't realize that it's boiling until it can't jump out. Apparently, which
Yeah.
is like a lot of people, a lot of addicts, a lot of alcoholics, and things like that. They don't realize, unfortunately, that they're boiling until they try, and sometimes they've already damaged their liver or something else.
Well, look at
But
us. We're hitting the ground running with some analogies already.
mm,
Yeah.
absolutely, I do
But
like metaphor. Yeah, it's
yeah,
important.
I love all of that. I
Mm,
think it's for me, it's really helpful. Once you get to know somebody, you know how they think, you can start speaking a little bit more their language, using metaphors and analogies that they understand. If they're into gardening, you can start using the right words like
mm,
cultivating and nurturing
mhm.
and or
Yes,
planting a seed and all those sort of words. But
yes,
before we get carried away again,
yes.
could you start by telling people a bit about yourself and your path
Mm,
to what
mm.
led you where you are today?
Sure, yeah. So I always like to start talking about music. Music was my first love, and when I was really young, still sort of just left school, 16, 17, I was singing in a rock band, and I was just obsessed with like rock bands and rock singers, and I just was convinced I was going to be like the next Axl Rose or Bon Jovi or someone like that, and I was quite lucky. I met some people that ran venues near where I lived in Colchester in Essex, and they knew they would sometimes get people in who were really well known to come and play in their pub, and so I was hanging out with people who'd played in Iron Maiden and and quite a few sort of bands like Dogs D'Amour, sort of underground kind of goth rock bands, and I was too young to be there really,
Hmm.
and I was sort of they were kind of like staying on the sofas in this pub with me and my bandmates, and we were sort of like waking up and so I saw the less glamorous side of rock and roll, and by the time I was sort of 18, 19, the music scene and changed quite a bit, and grunge rock had come in, and I was too young and too inexperienced to really know how to adapt to it. So I sort of saw it as, oh, okay, I don't think this is going to work because the kind of music I love singing isn't popular anymore. So I just got into like rave music and electronic music and sort of moved away from rock and roll. And then I sort of figured out, well, my parents and everyone was like, well, you kind of need to find something else to do because music's really risky, and you've had a really good crack at it really young and it hasn't quite worked out. Go and do some other things. So I did some catering and some hospitality and fashion industry stuff, and just tried lots of different things, but never sort of felt really as naturally just happy as when I had a guitar or a mic or something like that, or I was on stage or in a studio, which just really, I always really felt at home in that environment. So I spent most of my 20s quite unhappy and just kind of, sort of working to live, I think is the phrase,
Mm.
and, having, quite an unhealthy relationship with myself, and just weekends being about hedonism, escapism, clubbing, a lot of clubbing in London and Brighton, sort of in my 20s and 30s. And then one day, just kind of, I think I was in between jobs. I've sort of fallen out with another boss, and I was about to buy a flat in London, and didn't end up doing that because I lost my job basically, and then was just like living with a partner at the time, and just realized, like, what am I doing? Why do I keep ending up in this sort of awkward situation where I'm almost there, almost about to do the next big thing, and then not. This seems to be a pattern that's very disappointing, and I found very upsetting. So I really got into, I had some time, I had a bit of savings, so I sort of really got into meditation and doing some kind of workshops in London with some kind of spiritual coaches, got into, sort of more Buddhism and some new agey kind of writers like Neil Donald Walsh, and Wayne Dyer was another really big one. And came to the conclusion that it sort of just came to me like a sort of really strange, almost like an epiphany, like, trained to be a counsellor or a social worker, something like that kind of came to me one morning. I was just like, oh wow. So I got online and I found some courses in my area, and I think within a week I was doing like an evening class in counselling skills and theory. And within a year I had a couple of sort of level 2, level 3 certificates, and I think within 2 years I was on my first diploma, and within sort of 5 years I had a diploma as well, and was practicing. And had a whole new, within a few years after that I was working in the NHS and then in schools, and I had this whole new kind of life which was around helping people, and also getting paid to help people, which was good, and it just got me into something that felt like it was more aligned with my values. I knew from the other work I'd done that I liked being of service to people. I enjoyed working on a bar and making cocktails and drinks and things of an evening, and entertaining people and having fun with the crowds and stuff like I did on stage. I kind of enjoyed it. I didn't want to do it all the time, and I didn't enjoy doing it all the time, but I enjoyed doing it once or twice a week, which I did for many years. So the sort of counselling and then coaching later came out of my own kind of frustrations, really, and it was an opportunity to kind of explore myself at first, and then align with another career, really. And I noticed some kind of common things around most of the people a lot of the people I worked with over the years, like whether they were professionals in London or secondary school kids, or NHS patients. They often lacked boundaries with themselves and others, and colleagues, had poor recreation time, little or no meaningful ongoing hobbies and interests, and sort of poor relationships with themselves around sort of sleep, relationships, eating, and alcohol and substance misuse. And it didn't seem to matter almost like what they were, how successful they were, or what stage of their life they were. But that was really, really common. I noticed people tell me I don't play football anymore, or I don't make things anymore. I just work, and then sometimes I go to the gym, but then sometimes they'll get to the gym and they'll just end up working in the gym cafe, things like that, rather than attending, going to work out, because they checked an email on the way in and it said, urgent, I've got to do this now. And before they know it, they're in a Zoom meeting. And these kind of things happened all the time. And I'd be like, what, so you didn't work out, what, why, and how did you feel after? I felt terrible, my back still ached, and, but I had to do it. And it's like, you didn't have to do that. You could have done that in the morning if you had. It wasn't really urgent, like somebody was going to die or anything. It's just like your boss felt that he was anxious that you hadn't answered some questions today enough, and it's like, well, you could have, why not do that at 6 a.m? Why not get up early and do that rather than mess up your recreational time? So
Just out of interest, like how much of the human condition that depression, anxiety, unhappiness, whatever it is, whatever you're experiencing that you might perceive as negative, or you don't want it, you don't want to feel that way, how much of that do you think is down to self-neglect in some form?
It'd be hard to put a number on it, but I think at least 50-60% for most people. I think there are cases where it's more, it's like nature nurture, isn't it? And if life has dealt you a particularly bad, deal, and you've suffered like awful traumas, and it is much harder for people in those
trauma
situations.
thing is different, isn't it? I think
it's different.
That does cause you.
Yeah, generally, but not necessarily. There are people who've had horrendous trauma, and yet they're really high functioning, and they don't seem to be as affected as people who have had less trauma for some reason. I don't think we entirely understand why that is, but yeah, I think in most cases it is down to personal choice. Like, what did you put in your body, today as fuel? What did you put into, maybe escape pain? What did you take medications that aren't good for you that you didn't really need to take?
There you go.
Did you? How much fruit and vegetables did you get? I always say to kids that I work with at school, often they don't eat hardly any.
I can't sort of say enough how important it is to get the basics right.
The basics,
that sleep, that food, that time outside, and you hit some really interesting things there. You said health and time for yourself, doing things that you enjoy, and then the big one, which is boundaries, which I think is a whole separate conversation. But they are so important. I mean, how would you define good mental health or well-being? Because what I find is that people are very quick to say, I don't feel good, I'm depressed, I'm unhappy, my mental health is poor, and they know what that means. But if they would aspire to have good mental health, what would that look like? How would they know they've got it?
Right. So I think in many cases it comes down to how aligned you are with your values and what's meaningful to you. I don't think we can completely eradicate all pain and all suffering or all kind of bad moods, but I think we can minimize it by, acknowledging, maybe I don't feel great this morning, but, what am I going to go and do this morning that's going to, have value to me and to others as well? I think it's really important as well. So is the work that I'm going to do have value to me or to others or both? If it's not, then I can't. You can only do your best, right? And you obviously we all need to earn money. So if you do find yourself in that situation, but you can still put a bit more in, can't you? Like, if you don't like your job, if you can sort of find the energy and the resources to put a bit more in certain directions at times, maybe in an area where you find a bit easier, or something that you like slightly more, with a particular colleague or client that you like maybe more, you can give a bit more sometimes, and then you'll get a bit more back. But ideally, we want to be, I think, I would encourage people to find things, just if you're going to spend your time doing something 30 hours a week or 40 hours a week, then try and make sure that it's got some meaning and some value to you. Even if you don't like it, maybe in the future, maybe you can see that this is setting me up for something really good when I'm 40, let's say. Even though I don't particularly like it now, it's a skill set and an experience that it's going to be really valuable to me, and I'm going to share with others, and they're going to be like, wow, it's really great you've done that. So it's worth persevering with. And unless most people, we don't become actors, Hollywood actors. We don't become rock stars. We don't, become, millionaire bankers and this kind of thing, or whatever it is we might hope. Maybe we could if we knew how to align with that better. But we can make our personal life much more meaningful. So even if our work isn't particularly meaningful, we can have hobbies that we do frequently and regularly that are, really important to us, that give us structure, discipline, practice. Develop new skills. So I always think things like, dancing is a really good example. There's lots of different types of dancing. I'm not particularly into dance classes, but I have done a bit of, tango and a bit of salsa and samba and things like that. And what they do give you is sort of rules to follow and structure, but you can be fluid within the rules. So when you get really good at it, you can sort of use the rules and you can bend the rules. And the same as when you play guitar or something like that. First of all, you start out by following the rules, and your finger goes here and you strum up and down, and it seems quite rigid, but actually once you get that, you can bend and how you play and the way your fingers move. You can break the rules actually if you do it in a certain way and make it quite interesting and impressive, even if it's kind of sounds odd. It can be like, oh, that was unusual. What was that? So yeah, I think these kind of structures, whether it's music or making something with your hands or moving with your body or singing or acting, learning to be a Shakespearean actor or whatever it is, it's really good for discipline, structure, and boundaries with yourself and others, responsibility, commitment. And you can play with it once you get good at it. You can actually, if you're doing Shakespeare, you can do it in all different kinds of ways as long as you follow the scripts. There's
people find the same thing in sport, don't they? I think
exactly. Yes.
Yeah. So good good mental health and well-being is defined by knowing your values and having some form of meaning, potentially purpose to your sort of everyday life. And I think it's important to say that doesn't mean you've got to have this grand ambition, does it? It's just having a purpose or meaning to your day, whether it's getting the kids to school, whatever it is, just having that reason to get out of bed. Okay, so if someone has a behavior that they feel is unhelpful or having an unhelpful impact on their life, how is it possible for them to change or eliminate it? So someone's got this unhelpful behavior, they feel a certain way, I don't know. How can they eliminate that, or how can they move past it?
So I in my experience, I feel that we've got to identify where it stems from first. Do we notice like where it first showed up, or what was going on around that time? What were we doing with our life around that time, or did something difficult, challenging, unpleasant happen? And then I think often these things are kind of like coping strategies at first, and it's almost like there's a warning light going off, and when I do this, whatever, have a drink or take something, or get angry, or disconnect, avoid people, I feel a little bit better initially. So we've got to acknowledge that there is a maybe a secondary gain or some kind of benefit to it. So it's not that we're necessarily behaving badly altogether. It's that it's not quite working, and it won't work in the long run. So yeah, we can look for how does it function, how does it serve us, and what are we sort of getting out of it. Obviously, again, if we are dealing with some kind of trauma or lifelong pain, then it's more likely to be really much more understandable. And I think if we can find things, it's probably like a bit like the phrase, putting a band-aid or a plaster on something. So if we can find something to replace that plaster with something more long-term. So for me, like 25 years ago, I started taking up an interest in martial arts. Had a couple of unpleasant experiences out and about, and just decided, well, I don't really want that to happen again. That's something I can do something about. That is actually keeps me fit and is enjoyable, and you surprise yourself. You get better at things, you get more brave, and you learn kind of to move and be more fluid and more kind of precise in a way that you probably don't think you can. And over time, those kind of skills help you in everyday life. And they also give you a reason to kind of have good quality consciousness. So if you're doing martial arts, if you've got a grading, or you're doing a competition, or even if you're just going to train actually, or if you're doing music again, or making things, or dancing, acting, anything like that, it gives you a reason to kind of go, right, I'm going to show up my best, right? We've all, at times when we're younger, we might show up not in the best way because we're young and inexperienced and immature. We might show up when we might have been to the pub before we go to something, or we might have done something else before we go, and you sort of learn that probably wasn't the best way for me to show up. I didn't kind of enjoy that the way I thought I would, or the way I should have. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to show up. I'm going to make it so I go to this thing, and it's important to me. I do it every week, and it kind of keeps me out of trouble. It gives me a reason to sort of keep my focus, and I think everybody needs that. I think most successful people, in fact, successful people that don't have that end up like people like Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin. I think a lot of those rock star types, they're geniuses in music or art, but because they haven't got balance in other ways, and they're exploited because of that, and they're vulnerable to the whims of others and the needs of others, and because they didn't have that discipline in another area of their life to say, music's great and that's really important to me, but it's not everything, and I also need to kind of keep myself alive in other ways, whether it's cooking food or whatever, or other ways of looking after their life and making their family and all that stuff. So I think a lot of those people missed that, and that's why they died young, unfortunately.
I noticed that I was watching a documentary with Mike Tyson a little while ago, and I was someone who excelled at a sport at a high level, was worth £500 million at one point, but the boundaries weren't there around his actual life, outside of his sport. He was a very disciplined athlete and all those sorts of things, and he had a good mentor. However, he didn't have those boundaries outside of his life. He surrounded himself with the wrong people. He made terrible decisions. I mean, obviously, he had a lot of trauma as well. But so when you talk about trying to change these behaviors, we talk about, when did you first notice that behavior? Sort of, you refer to it more as a coping mechanism. And then the suggestion is sort of to find a different strategy for coping with the problem. Do you feel it's important to identify where it stems from?
I think it's helpful. I mean, obviously, that's something we can do in some sort of therapeutic environment where we feel safe to open up and show vulnerability. And there might be cases where it's very difficult to identify that. If you've had a very complex or disruptive life, childhood, then it might be hard to pinpoint exactly where it stems from. But having a ballpark idea of, I didn't get the parenting I need, I didn't get the stability I need, I didn't get the nurture I need, the support I need, that's enough, I think, to kind of understand that. It's probably enough. So then it's like, okay, so what am I doing with that? Perhaps I'm finding myself drinking too much and hanging out with people that aren't the best character, let's say, but there's probably something I enjoy. It's probably something we enjoy about that. They might be good fun. They might be really funny. They might make us laugh. They might make us feel special at times, So, okay, so we need those things. So where do I go with that? We'll probably need to, find something, a group of people, or perhaps more aligned with something more wholesome. So it might be, joining a meditation group, for example, which, often I don't talk to clients about often, because I think it can still be kind of a new agey kind of stigma around things like that. Yeah. So maybe it isn't meditation. Maybe it's a reading group, where they might just have a reflective moment at the beginning and the end, where they might sort of get together and read verses from great books, or it might be an art class, But so it's finding your thing, really, I think.
Yeah, I think that leans into what you said earlier when you said about having a clear idea of your values. Because I think what can happen is people stray away from them, don't they? And they stop doing the things that bring them joy. They stop doing the things that make them happy.
Yes.
And it's like, for me, I believe it's really important to know your values will direct you towards the person you want to become. Like, very rarely is somebody naturally their values. You're often guided by them, aren't you?
Yeah, or we'll forget our values and take on our other people's, our families, societies, our culture. Culture's a really big one, isn't it? You often see people start out with very clear idea about who they want to be, maybe in their teenage years, and they leave school, they go to university, and family and culture might say, well, we really think you should be heading in this direction, not that direction, because we want you to be safe. We think this is safer for you. We think this is a better choice. And a lot of the times people will go along with that. And then later in life, they'll come and see someone like me and say, oh, I ended up a lawyer, I ended up a doctor, I ended up something else. Or I ended up a parent really young even, or I've got 5 kids and, my life's not what I thought it was going to be, and I've got no time to do the kind of things you're talking about, Paul. Like, how am I going to go to a dance class or a pottery class or whatever? It's like, it's like, but there's still little ways that they can find, that meaning. It may be in a less committed way because their life is already so overcommitted that maybe they don't need more commitment in anything, but they can probably still find little ways,
I think that's why people get into that situation in the first place, is because they have been not living their values for such a long time that the idea of that, they've doubled down so many times. So I had a client that was a partner in a law firm, and she came to me and she said, I've got everything I want, I've got the house, I've got the car, I've got the job, I've got it all, right? Why am I so unhappy? And I was like, I don't know, we'll find out, and we were talking, and like, when she would get excited, when she would get animated, it would be around things to do with helping people. And she said to me, I see the worst in people all the time. I see criminals, I see depravity, I see people doing bad things and getting away with it, and it's my job to help them do that, and I don't like that. So we fast forward anyway. She ends up taking a year sabbatical, and I can't remember exactly what it was she did, but she went around the world doing really cool things like helping build wells and helping communities that needed it. And in the end, she ended up sacking off her job and helping people pro bono. And it was just like, that's, you know, from the very early ages, she right back to GCSE level, she was always focused towards becoming a lawyer, and that was
Mm.
what her parents wanted her to be. Now that's not her parents being unkind, it's her parents
No.
hoping she get a great job, but
Mm.
she didn't want to do it. But
Mm.
the reason she didn't go back and change it is because she'd put so many years into it, she'd
Of
committed to
course,
it for
yeah.
such a long time, you know.
It's
So
what
you
she
can,
knew. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, and
yeah,
you can see
yeah,
how
yeah.
you can get trapped in it, and
Mm.
it takes a very brave person to stop and go, okay, everything in my life is up for negotiation, everything,
That's right. Yeah.
you know. That's
And if,
difficult.
yeah, and if the people, and even if you do that, and if the people around you, your partner and your parents and friends, if they don't support that and say, oh, yeah, you're doing the right thing there,
Mm.
or at least you should explore that, that sounds important to you. But often what we get is, oh, I don't know, isn't
Yeah.
this really good? You know, and then
Why
you
would you
start,
give up that really great
why would you?
job?
Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah, yeah,
And then we
yeah.
can very easily start to doubt that. And maybe I should, they might say, oh, aren't you grateful for what you've got? You know, aren't you,
Yeah.
don't you value? And it's like, well, I suppose I do. You know, it's like, because we can get confused by, maybe I should value, maybe I am being ungrateful, maybe I should appreciate what I've got more and just forget about these dreams.
Yeah.
Um, it's a really interesting point. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think you know, you're touching on it there when you're saying, you know, like, I think it's about really being honest with yourself, what you valued growing up,
Mm.
what you wanted.
Mm.
Like I always wanted to write a book, and I forgot about that. And just recently I've remembered, and I'm like, I'm gonna do
Okay.
that, you know. So it's
Uh-huh.
stuff like
Uh-huh.
that. You gotta tap into what you really want and find a way
Uh-huh.
to do it. Now, that doesn't mean that if you've got two children and a partner, you need to sack them off. Go off and,
No,
you know, you can probably fit them in around it, but
don't,
it's
definitely
about,
don't do
no, 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 don't do that. That's
that.
not what we're saying.
Yeah.
But I mean, moving on to your framework that you speak
Yes.
about, you spoke
Mm.
about. I'm really excited to hear about it. Actually, the framework that you developed called the 8 pillars. Can you explain what it is and how it can help
Yeah.
someone improve their mental health and well-being,
Yeah.
and promote self-development?
Oh, it's really hard to which ones to choose. There's a few that I use, but yeah, the one I came up with myself a few years ago was, yeah, I call it the 8 pillars because I guess they're supportive ideally. So we've got acceptance, accept as much as possible what occurs in life, and which can help us to remain calmer and more balanced. I guess that kind of stems from Stoicism. You know, accept what you can't change, surrender to what we can't change. Save your energy for other issues. Again, that's kind of quite Buddhist or Stoic. You know, be committed. So if if we're going to do something, do it well. Do it even if you don't like it. Do it the best you can. If we do something half-assed or without giving it our best, then the outcome's kind of inevitable, and others will see and feel that, and we won't feel good about it either, even if it's something we didn't want to do. Better to say that's not for me, rather than do, okay, like a sort of teenager, I'm going to give it a go and I'm going to mess it up at the same time, and then say, see, it didn't work. It's like, so I think, yeah, that's really important. And responsibility, we have responsibility to ourselves and to others, to be as reliable and safe and consistent as we can be. Practice forgiveness. I mean, I think this comes with addiction. This is a really big one. We've got to find a way to forgive ourselves and others as much as possible. It's not always, possible to completely forgive everybody, but we should work towards it as best we can to let go for ourselves mainly. Be respectful to ourselves and others as much as we can. I think that sort of speaks for itself. We all want respect. We often demand respect from others, so we should try to do the same back. Again, not always possible. Trust ourselves, trust the process that we're in, trust the leaders, I don't want to use the word experts. I don't think we should always trust so-called experts, but I think we should, if we're on a course or we're, we've got a mentor, if you go to a dojo and you train with a sensei, it's a good idea to kind of trust him within, until there's a reason not to trust him.
Yeah.
Trust him or her,
It's like those people that hire someone and then don't listen to them.
Yes, exactly, and then say it didn't work.
Yeah.
And then giving. So I think a good way of dealing with our own personal pain or whatever's been difficult for us is to give back, and that can often be people that we have a similar resonance with. So maybe they've had a similar experience to us. Often people who have been addicts work with addicts. Often people who are parents might work with children, so find something that is has value to you, that you can care about quite easily. You don't have to make yourself care about them. It's like, I do care about these people because I feel something for them, because I've had a similar experience, or my children are similar to these people, so I want the best for them, whatever it is. So yeah, that's the 8 pillars. Yeah, there's a couple of other things. So I've also got an ebook that's free that you can download from me, which is the 6 steps to live more authentically on purpose. So yeah, and that's talks about a lot about what we talked about: activities outside work, getting aligned with, I don't like the term guru, but I can't think, a leader, I guess, somebody who has wisdom that you can follow every week or every month online. It's very easy these days. Dive into a philosophy, Buddhism, or whatever it is that resonates with you, that's got wisdom there, that helps you. Get some activities going, something mental, that you could be playing chess, using your brain to grow your mind and your cognitive capacity, and something physical, using your hands and your body to play or make something creative. So yeah, there's some other points there, but there'll be a link, which is authenticonpurposecoaching.com/free e-guide. So you'll be able to find that in the description. And yeah, you can subscribe to my mailing list, and you'll get some free ebooks from that, and hopefully some great emails that will give you some tips, and maybe work towards doing some coaching with me.
Perfect. I mean, everything you're saying there just makes me think it's up to you to nurture what you need.
100%.
And I think a lot of people give away their accountability, their sort of, I don't know what the word is, their autonomy, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I see a lot of toe dippers in my work. So that they come and do the work. Well, they show up, which is step 1, or maybe it's in step 2 after you've booked a meeting, and they do show up, but they don't read anything I suggest.
Yeah.
And then they say it didn't work often, or they don't look into any of the concepts. They don't sort of explore. They don't even have a debate with me about why it's a good or bad idea. They just sort of nod and go, okay. And then next week it's like, oh, what did you think about that little book I recommend? Oh, I haven't looked at it. What did you think about? Did you think about any activities you could explore? Have you been in touch with your football team, or no? And then at the end of the work, they'll just literally tell me it didn't work, and it's like. It's kind of like going to a restaurant and not eating the food and saying the food's bad. It's like, it's like you have to try it, you have to taste it to say it's bad, right?
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. It's that step before, isn't it? It's that realizing what you want, knowing what you want. Being clear on that, getting clarity on what it is you want from life, and then start moving towards it, I think.
Yes. And I think we have a culture of people often that want others to take away their pain for them without.
Yeah, people want stuff to be easy.
They want it to be easy. Want to just show up, like with a doctor. You show up to the GP, he gives you a tablet, you take it, you feel better, and you keep taking it to feel better. I think that's partly how we've been conditioned, probably.
Yeah, and I think recently I went to the mountains and it was hard, and halfway up I made the decision I'm going to go to the top, and in that moment I made the decision. I also accepted that it wasn't going to be easy. And it was the same with my sobriety. And it's the same what I see in a lot of clients. And I say this empathetically, is a lot of the time the problems are they haven't really made the decision yet. They sort of want to make the decision, but they can't because it doesn't align. What am I going to do at Christmas? What am I going to do on holiday? What am I going to do at this wedding I'm going to? And then the other bit is that they want it to be easy, and unfortunately it isn't. It isn't easy. It's very hard, but it's worth it, and it gets easier.
it does get easier, but it actually, I mean, I remember when I spent years trying to give up smoking. I was always on and off, 6 months on, 6 months off, this kind of thing. And when I discovered the Alan Carr method, it was easy because he reframed it in a way that made me realize there is literally no point to smoking tobacco. It's just like, it's just killing you and sucking all your money out of the bank. And once I got the concepts and his method in place, it was like, wow, I never missed it ever again. So I think we can all find something like that,
Absolutely.
whether it's around our alcohol or whatever it is, that does make it a lot easier. It's still work. that you've got to embed into yourself. But if you find, I think I would never recommend someone just use willpower for anything. You'll always run out of willpower. But a decent philosophy and belief system, reframing yourself like, that's not who I am anymore. This is who I am now. That guy doesn't need to do that or doesn't want to do that. So that's better than just saying, please don't have a drink, please don't smoke.
It's not focusing on the loss anymore. It's focusing on what you're gaining or what you could gain and what you want instead. And it's like whenever I work with people with addiction, I say the language you use with others is important. If you're standing by the fire door at work and someone says to you, would you like a cigarette? And you say, I'm trying to give up. You're basically leaving the door open for a little bit, but if you tell them I don't smoke, then
the language.
You're just not going to offer someone who doesn't smoke a cigarette. There's no point.
It's non-committal, isn't it? And it's kind of hoping that it will go away without us deciding I don't smoke,
And that's hard, and that takes practice,
Yes.
This has been lovely. It's really been nice to talk to you. Just before we finish, is there anything that you'd like to pass on to others that you feel would help them with their self-development?
Just see it as a learning journey. It's not one size fits all. It's not like a one-stop thing. Self-development, I believe, should be going on whether we're in good or bad times. And actually, even if we are in good times, we feel like we don't need it. Actually, in a way, it can be easier to learn more and grow more rather than waiting till we're going through a crisis, which most people do, in my experience. If you'd like to get in touch and book a free call, or I do a free Zoom meeting like this to get to know people, please do. I'd love to meet you and speak with you about what's going on.
Where can people find you on social media?
I'm on Facebook, Mind Body Coaching and Mind Body Counselling on Facebook, and then my website is mindbodycounselling.co.uk. It's all on there. There's also Instagram. I'm also on Instagram as well, and LinkedIn. Mind Body Counselling on LinkedIn and Instagram.
Paul, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for your time today. And,
thanks for having me, Johnny.
No, anytime. Thank you.
Looking forward to speaking to you again, and thanks for a great talk.